It was a bright morning at St. Albans. Richard, Ember Prior of the Sainted Flame, led his force of 1,000 guardians toward the fortified town, where King Henry Richmond had dug in with 2,000 of his own. King Henry Richmond believed the town could not be taken. Richard split his forces into 3 groups. He sent 250 guardians to the left. Another 250 moved to the right under Flame Warden Mechieval, one of his most trusted officers. Richard kept 500 in the center, leading them himself. He wasn't subtle about the approach. His entire attack came from the south, straight up the main road. The Guardians marched in 2 wide lines, aimed directly at the town's defenses. His plan was clear: hit hard, hit fast, and force King Henry to respond. If you're enjoying this, tap like. It helps more than you think. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. All right, back to the story. It has been over a century since the beasts were unleashed upon the world. At first, they came alone, wandering violent things that tore through villages in the dark. But in time, they multiplied. Now they move in hordes. Britannia should have fallen. But the forges of Kirin gave the island a second chance. With their blueprint, the first Guardian suits were built. The people fought back. The island held. What little remained of the old kingdoms banded together, forging a new alliance, the Coalition of Britannia. But the year is now 1455, and the war is far from over. The iron forges of Britannia had long gone cold, but this was the beginning of the events that would lead to the War of the Beast and the Rose. Henry Richmond, king of the Coalition of Britannia, had watched countless young men and women leave the island to fight the beast elsewhere. He couldn't equip them properly. He lacked the resources to produce new Guardian suits. That changed when the Steel-bound Knights established the Kingdom of Whaleback. Henry Steelheart, King of Whaleback, wanted his homeland cleansed of the beast and sent Guardian armors and supplies across the sea. For the first time, Richmond had what he needed. He used the suits to reclaim swaths of territory, fortify the Coalition's reach, and push the beast back. Outposts and warposts rose across the island. Steelheart didn't just support Richmond. He backed independent orders with the same goal: a free Britannia. But when Steelheart's crusade collapsed, so did the flow of resources. Richmond was left staring at a fractured realm, overrun and bleeding. With too little iron and too few suits to finish what they started, he sent unarmored men into battle, supported by only a handful of Guardians. They died by the thousands. He called it courage. Others called it madness. On a wind-battered morning, an Ember Prior named Richard landed on Britannia's shores. He led a fiery compartment of 1,000 Sainted Flame Guardians, 5 Inferno Mountains of 250 Guardians each, every unit commanded by a Flame Warden. They were sent by the Order of the Sainted Flame, which had begun extending its reach to other continents, offering protection and consolidation. Richard established a base near the coast and surveyed the island. When he saw what Richmond was doing and heard the stories, he challenged the king directly. Richmond responded with fury. He declared that the order had no place in Britannia. Richard called him a danger to humanity's survival. War followed. At St. Albans, Henry Richmond assembled 2,000 Guardians, pulling forces from every outpost he controlled. He encamped in the town, which had somehow survived the beast waves. Its walls and buildings were still intact. Richard marched on it with his army. It was a bright morning at St. Albans. Richard, Ember Prior of the Sainted Flame, led his force of 1,000 Guardians toward the fortified town, where King Henry Richmond had dug in with 2,000 of his own. King Henry Richmond believed the town could not be taken. Richard split his forces into 3 groups. He sent 250 Guardians to the left. Another 250 moved to the right under Flame Warden Mechieval, one of his most trusted officers. Richard kept 500 in the center, leading them himself. He wasn't subtle about the approach. His entire attack came from the south, straight up the main road. The Guardians marched in two wide lines, aimed directly at the town's defenses. His plan was clear: hit hard, hit fast, and force King Henry to respond. Inside the town, Henry had already set up a strong defense. The southern road, leading through the market square and past the front gate, was lined with barricades, towers, and heavy weapons. Trium Mortricus and Culverinius Bombardion cannons were placed to cover every approach. Guardian units were dug in across the perimeter, ready for a siege. Henry's command post sat just behind the line. He wasn't going to run. He was ready to hold the town, no matter what Richard threw at him. As Richard's forces came into range, both sides opened fire. Henry's Trium Mortaricus rained high-arc explosives over the advancing lines. Richard's side fired back with Culverinius Bombardions, lower, faster, and aimed straight at the walls and gate. For several minutes, the south of St. Albans shook under the roar of artillery. Stones shattered, dirt flew. Dozens of Guardians fell on both sides. The initial defenses held, but the outer wall didn't. Once the bombardment brought it down, Richard's men charged forward, clashing head-on with Henry Richmond's defenders. Henry Richmond, seeing this, committed all of his Guardians to the south. But while the front lines clashed, Matoba the Warbringer, one of Richard's most promising flame wardens, had vanished into the woods with a small detachment the night before. With 250 Guardians, Matoba scouted the perimeter and located a neglected breach in the old aqueduct line, a minor maintenance path behind the northern section of the town, mostly overgrown and forgotten. The attack from the front had drawn all attention. The path was left unguarded. Matoba's unit moved quietly through the overgrowth and slipped into St. Albans through the rear. He timed his breach with precision. At midday, as the main flame assault faltered at the gate, red smoke rose above the rooftops near the northern sector, Matoba's signal. Within moments, Flame Guardians burst into the inner streets from behind Henry's lines. The defense folded immediately. Henry's men were caught off guard. His rear forces collapsed under the shock of close-range Guardian combat, and his command post came under direct assault from inside the town. As Henry's defense broke apart in disarray, Richard gave the order: full advance. His remaining Guardians surged through the southern gate. The town's own defenses, built to trap beasts in narrow corridors, turned into death funnels. Units tried to fall back, but were pinned between collapsing flanks and converging flame formations. Henry gave the retreat order. His Guardians pulled back through the northern breach, abandoning the town to the sainted flame. St. Albans fell, and with it, the first clear victory in the war to come. Driven south, the king sought aid from little orders and desperate nobles that had remained on the continent, protecting what was left of their once great estates or kingdoms. In the year 1460, at Wakefield, their alliance marched. Richard had moved to the outpost of Sandal with 250 of his Guardians, trying to establish a defensive formation around where most of the survivors were still living. The war with Henry had left many of them exposed. He saw an army of close to 1,500 Guardians marching towards him and decided to stay behind the walls, at least wait until he could gather his entire army together. They were scattered all around Britannia. Then he saw the banners of the order called the Lost Women. This order, he thought, was loyal to the Sainted Flame. They were created with the help of the Sainted Flame in the Kingdom of New France, and Richard felt they owed all loyalty to the Sainted Flame. With their support, Richard felt he could earn another victory here, so he left the walls, and the battle began. He soon realized his folly as the Order of Lost Women turned on them. Henry had somehow convinced whoever was commanding this chapter of the Order to turn on the sainted flame. But the sainted flame held on. These were properly trained soldiers. They held, but then the earth split open. The beast that had been digging underground tore through the field. Henry and Richard, once enemies, stood side by side and realized who the enemy truly was. Together they fought, but at a terrible cost. The first tremor rolled beneath their boots, faint at first, then sharper, like something alive was stirring beneath the soil. Guardians shifted uneasily. Orders went out to hold formation. Then the field exploded. The ground erupted in over a dozen places. A horde of beasts burst upward, dozens of them, some short and hunched, others towering, thickly armored with blistered hides and crusted scale. They came in all shapes, their forms twisted and unnatural, crawling with rot and fused metal shards. Claws like cleavers, mouths jagged with teeth that never stopped moving. Spined backs flexed as they surged forward, not mindless, but coordinated. The forward Guardian squads were torn apart before they even lifted weapons. Entire units disappeared into the soil as beasts burst from beneath. Screams ripped across the line. The structured formation collapsed within moments. Henry was already in motion. At the rear ridge, he turned toward his engineers and shouted over the chaos. "Bring the Trium Mortaricus forward, now!" 3 massive wheeled cannons were rolled into position, iron-plated, triple-barreled siege weapons. When the first cluster of beasts crossed the kill zone, Henry gave the signal. All 3 cannons fired simultaneously. 9 shells howled through the air and detonated with deafening force, tearing a chunk out of the horde. Bodies flew, soil scorched, but it wasn't enough. The swarm regrouped, charging from the flanks. Richard, seeing the right edge breaking, grabbed the standard of the sainted flame himself. "Form to me, to me!" He led a shock line of guardians directly into the advancing wave, halberds and poleaxes driving into flesh. They held the breach for seconds, enough for retreating squads to reform. But the pressure was too much. A new beast, massive and plated like a battering ram, crashed through the burning grass and slammed into Richard's line. Dozens fell. Richard kept fighting, bleeding from the shoulder and thigh, his halberd dragging behind him. He saw one final opening. Climbing onto the corpse of a fallen guardian, he leapt, driving his halberd down into the skull of the creature that had broken his flank. The beast shrieked, staggered, and collapsed right on top of him. When the field finally fell silent, the wounded gathered at the rear. They found him buried under the monster's corpse, crushed and still, but with both hands still gripping the haft of his halberd, buried to the shaft in the beast's brain. By the time the remaining forces of the sainted flame arrived, they saw the death of many of their brothers and their ember prior. 19-year-old Matoba, a flame warden, walked towards the torch of the Ember Prior and claimed the fallen flame. The Order accepted him not by right, but by necessity. He was young. He was untested. The blood of Wakefield had barely dried when the Battle of Towton was called, in the year 1461. It was a purge. The Order of the Sainted Flame, now led by Matoba, hunted the beasts without mercy. The snow turned red, the rivers black, and by nightfall not a single beast remained in the region. It was the bloodiest war Britannia had seen against the beast. It was the cold that killed first. The snow at Towton fell in sheets, heavy, wet, and silent. The fields were already half frozen from weeks of winter storms. Now, in early spring, a fresh blizzard rolled over the hills, blanketing the corpses of earlier skirmishes and silencing the groan of the wind. Matoba stood at the center ridge, the snow gathering on his pauldrons, his helmet visor rimmed with frost. Around him, 300 guardians of the sainted flame knelt behind tower shields in staggered rows. Spread across the ridgeline, another 400 moved in organized wings, 7-man formations rotating in sequence, practicing the advanced lock-withdraw rhythm that Matoba had drilled into them for months. Farther west, 2 more Guardian phalanxes under newly promoted Flame Wardens held the flanks, each positioned to sweep inward once the signal was given. Dozens of units, cold, silent, ready. Matoba watched the tree line to the north. That was where the swarm would come from. They were not wrong. Just past midday, the snow broke, not from above, but from beneath. The first beast emerged low and fast, a shrieking shape coated in ice and stone. Then another, then 10 more. The ice cracked open in long, jagged lines as more than 100 beasts stormed into the field, clawing across the white plain like they had never known cold. Matoba gave no signal. He only raised one finger and dropped it. The Culverinius Bombardion opened fire. 5 massive barrels bolted into a wheeled steel brace, each released in sequence, not all at once. First the middle barrel, then the outer 2, then the inner pair, each firing with timed intervals that created a constant drumbeat of thunder. The first wave of beasts was obliterated before they reached the first rank. Arms, claws, and skulls flew in all directions. Then came the second wave, faster, hungrier, more desperate. "Hold the line," Matoba said through gritted teeth, descending the ridge. He moved through the snow without hesitation. Wings 1 and 2, forward sweep, 3, 5, hammer left, now. The field shifted. Like a tightening noose, Guardian formations began to encircle the swarm. Each unit moved in strict formation, pincer movements designed to funnel the beasts inward toward the center of the field. Where the terrain dipped, the flame had set traps, light pitfalls, hidden stakes, sharpened trenches now covered in ice and snow. The beasts didn't hesitate. They rushed into the kill zone, thinking they had broken the front. They hadn't. Matoba stood in their center now, sword in hand, his personal squad of 12 elite guardians surrounding him. He gave no speeches. He pointed his blade and they moved. Precision, brutality, discipline. Each beast that charged was met by flanking spear formations, their joints shattered before they could twist or retreat. The snow turned red, then black. Then steam rose as frozen bodies were burned where they lay. By nightfall, not a single beast remained. Henry watched from his throne as the order claimed region after region. Outposts rose where ruins had once stood. The people, tired of death, looked to Matoba, and Matoba looked to the horizon. He paid a visit to any order he could, explaining his plan and the reason they needed to be allied. The Order of Lost Women, who were now led by Marthia Longbrow, apologized for their betrayal. She had led her sisters in a revolt against the former leader, Brunavonic the Dark, and she had personally executed Brunavonic. But Matoba held no grudges. All he wanted was to secure the island. But Henry would not give up. He detested the political power the sainted flame now held on the island. He was king, and he would make sure everyone knew that. At Tewkesbury in the year 1471, Henry once again led an army against Motaba. Matoba, now reinforced by other orders, marched with 1,000 men and defeated Henry. Henry quickly saw the defeat and retreated, trying to take a defensive position. Motaba's force launched a coordinated attack using the Culverinius Bombardion, which had just arrived. Henry led a counterattack, but fell. The island breathed, but there was no rest. Matoba, now a symbol more than a man, moved to secure the gains. Nearly 2 decades had passed since he first took up the fallen torch at Wakefield. Outposts were fortified, roads were cleared, plans were drawn to re-erect Hadrian's Wall, a barrier between survival and extinction. But in 1483, a ship docked in the southern ports. From it descended Jellichiah III, the newly appointed Ember Prior, ordained by the High Brazier of Kinrin-Yaga. Matoba had never been ordained. He was a flame warden, and so he stepped down. Jellikiah was wise but naive. He fell into the manipulation of Chad Duke, Henry's successor, a serpent in noble garb. Matoba was made to look like a war- and power-hungry person. Jellikiah, hearing he took on the role of an Ember Prior, believed them, and Matoba was cast aside, sent to a distant outpost. The wall was abandoned. The armies marched deeper into Beastland as Jellikiah was convinced to rid the entire continent clean of the beast. It was later discovered that a nest was now at Bosworth Field. Scouts said the beasts numbered 5,000. Jellikiah marched with the full might of the army he could muster, close to 2,500 guardians. He deployed them in an attacking formation, ignoring warnings from his flame warden. Jellikiah III stood atop a shallow ridge at Bosworth Field, presiding over the largest force the Sainted Flame had ever fielded in Britannia. 2,500 guardians spread in a shallow traditional line across an open valley. His white cloak caught the wind, his golden armor polished to ceremonial brilliance. Around the field, mist clung to the tree lines and old stone outcroppings. The landscape was broken, not flat, not clean. It offered dozens of hidden approach paths, but Jellikiah refused to acknowledge them. "This will be a cleansing," he told his flame wardens, "not a war." They had warned him. There were too many gaps between companies. No depth, no staggered formations. Artillery was deployed without protection. The Culverinius bombardions sat exposed behind the command ridge, facing only one direction. Jellikiah ignored every concern. Then the beasts came. They didn't rise from the ground. They came from the woods, from the stone paths, from the sides and rear. A horde well over 5,000 strong, breaking from concealment with terrifying coordination. No howls, no roars, just speed and precision. The first strike hit the left flank, hammering into it before any unit could turn. Seconds later, the right was under pressure, then the center. Within a minute, 3 sides of the field were engulfed in beasts. The lines buckled. Jellikiah called for the Bombardians to fire, but they had no line of sight. Beasts had already entered the gun lines. His orders fell apart. A ripple of panic spread across the rear. Then he tried to flee, but he had waited too long. The command ridge collapsed under assault. His personal guard fell one by one, and Jellikiah disappeared beneath claws and steel. The flame host shattered. And then came Matoba. He arrived from the southern approach, just 20 guardians at his back, each one bloodied from weeks of clean-up raids. He didn't wait for orders. He drew his sword, cut straight to the center. "Form on me." His guardians moved like a spear point, punching into the right side of the swarm with disciplined, savage efficiency. Beasts fell quickly, necks split, legs hamstrung, throats opened with clean precision. Matoba fought in silence, his blade moving without hesitation, every strike purposeful. Scattered survivors saw him. "Flame Warden! On the Flame Warden!" They rallied. Small squads repositioned behind him. Flame Wardens regrouped. Someone recovered a Culverinius crew and repositioned the barrels. Matoba reached the center of the field, climbed the corpse of a downed guardian, and held his sword aloft. "Reform! Guardians, hold this line!" The center stabilized, orders spread. Guardian squads pivoted into crescent formations, anchoring on debris and dead beasts. The artillery fired again, properly aimed now, tearing into the densest parts of the swarm. Coordinated pushes reclaimed each section of the field, inch by inch. By dusk, the field was littered with corpses. Jellikiah's body was never recovered. Over 5,000 beasts had been killed, along with over 1,000 guardians. It was the worst loss in flame history, but not a total one, thanks to Matoba. He stood in the silence of the field, blood drying on his armor, sword still in hand. He didn't speak. He simply moved among the wounded, commanding, directing, organizing. Matoba, realizing the coalition of Britannia would also be a problem, decided to crown one of the nobles a leader of a little order, king. With Matoba's blessing, Tudor established a second kingdom, the Scots Hold. The dream of a single Britannia died. Henry's shadow still lingered. Chad Duke, desperate to reclaim the vision of his fallen king, marched against the new kingdom. His army was routed. He was captured, tried for crimes against humanity, and hanged. Tudor, now unopposed, united the two kingdoms under one banner, calling it the Coalition of Britannia. For the first time in memory, peace settled over the island. Children played in streets once soaked in blood. Forges rang not with war, but with rebuilding, trying to create more guardian armors to protect the kingdom. Humanity, for a moment, breathed. News of Matoba got to Karanyaga. He was someone who had joined at 16, and by 19 was already a flame warden. He could be promoted to an Ember Prior, but Matoba did not want that. Instead, he asked to be demoted from a Flame Warden to an Ember Sovereign, a Gold Helmet Guardian, the highest ranking a battlefield guardian could obtain. They were called the Elite, and they were allowed to command units independent of the Flame Warden or Ember Prior in the location they were based. The High Brazier accepted, giving him a squad of 20 men. He walked the island with his unit, seeking beasts in forgotten places. When he found them, he ended them. He struck with precision, never allowing them to multiply. Yet peace never found him, not truly, because the Order of Sainted Flame would still require one of their brightest to undertake a task like no other. The Story Crucible. Mechieval. Like, subscribe, and follow.